My name is Danielle Atwood. I am 32 years old. Last Sunday, my mother-in-law slid a manila envelope across the polished mahogany of her dining room table and said, "I think you need to see this." The air in the room, already heavy with the scent of roasted lamb and unexpressed resentment, grew thick enough to choke on. She expected the results inside that envelope to destroy my marriage to her son, Mark. She expected them to sever my daughter's claim to the family name and fortune. What she did not expect was that those same results would incinerate the foundation of her entire life. What she did not expect was that they would destroy her. But here is what none of them knew. Not my quietly complicit father-in-law, Robert, and not even my husband, Mark. I had found out about the test 2 weeks before that dinner, and what I did with those 2 weeks changed everything. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love it if you'd tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now and what time is it where you are? I really love reading those and seeing where my story is reaching. Now, let me take you back. Let me take you back 7 years to the beginning of it all. 7 years ago, I met Mark Atwood at a charity gala I'd been dragged to by my boss. I was a junior forensic accountant at a small but tenacious firm in the city, the kind of person more comfortable with spreadsheets than small talk. The room was a universe of couture and champagne, and I felt like an astronaut who had forgotten her helmet. I was tracking the movement of a particularly ostentatious diamond necklace when a man with kind eyes and a smile that didn't feel rehearsed appeared beside me. "Trying to calculate the carat weight or the insurance fraud potential?" he asked. That was Mark. He wasn't like the others. He saw the world with an artist's curiosity, but spoke with the gentle cadence of someone who had learned early not to take up too much space. We talked for 3 hours, tucked away in a corner near a wilting floral arrangement, about everything and nothing. He was a high school history teacher, a profession that seemed beautifully, defiantly normal in the context of his family's immense wealth, which I wouldn't learn about until our third date. He told me he loved the clarity of the past, the way stories once finished couldn't be changed. I told him I loved the clarity of numbers, the way they never lied, no matter how much someone wanted them to. When he told me about his family, the Atwoods of Belmont Hill, it was with a quiet, almost apologetic tone. The name meant something in our city. It was etched onto the sides of hospital wings and university libraries. It meant old money, the kind that flows through generations like a lazy river, shaping the landscape around it without ever seeming to move. Mark was part of that, but also apart from it. He drove a sensible sedan, lived in a modest apartment downtown, and graded papers on weekends. The money was a fact of his life, not the center of it. I loved that about him. Meeting his parents, Patricia and Robert, was an entirely different matter. Their home was less a house and more a museum dedicated to the family's own importance. It sat on a sprawling, manicured lawn, a stone fortress of quiet judgment. Inside, the air was still and cool, smelling of lemon oil and old paper. Every surface gleamed. Every portrait on the wall featured a stern-faced Atwood ancestor staring down through the ages. And at the center of this universe was Patricia. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, with a perfectly maintained silver bob and eyes the color of a winter sky. She moved with a liquid grace, her voice a low, cultured murmur that could deliver a compliment and a criticism in the same breath. From the moment I shook her hand, I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Robert, her husband, was her shadow, a tall, stooped man with a kind but weary face, He seemed to have ceded all conversational territory to his wife decades ago. He offered me a drink, smiled a brief, watery smile, and then faded into the polished background. Patricia steered the conversation the way she steered everything, quietly with purpose. She touched her pearl earring, this small, practiced gesture I would see 1,000 times. She twisted it once between her thumb and forefinger, then smiled. She said it the way people say, interesting when they mean noted. So, Danielle, she began, her gaze sweeping over my simple black dress, a dress I had thought was elegant but now felt was woefully inadequate. Mark tells us you're an accountant. A forensic accountant, yes, I said. How fascinating, she murmured, the word fascinating landing like a judgment. Numbers and details, and where did you grow up, dear? The question wasn't idle curiosity. It was an interrogation of my origins. I grew up in a small two-bedroom house on the other side of the city, the side where lawns were patchy and fences were chain link. My father was a union carpenter, my mother a school secretary. They were good, honest people who had worked hard their entire lives to give me a future they never had. I was proud of them. But in Patricia Atwood's living room, my history felt like a liability. A neighborhood called Northgate, I said simply. Ah, she said. A single syllable, loaded with meaning. She knew exactly where it was. She had a map in her head, not of streets, but of social strata. She filed my location away. She was keeping score. Over the next few years, as Mark and I fell deeper in love and eventually married, Patricia's quiet campaign of subtle condescension continued. She never raised her voice. She was never overtly cruel. Her method was far more insidious. She used questions as weapons. Danielle, that's such a unique way to season the chicken. Where did you learn that? She'd ask at a family dinner, implying it was unsophisticated. When I announced I was keeping my job after the wedding, she tilted her head. Oh, of course, it must be nice to have a little hobby to keep you busy. She never saw my career as anything more than a quaint diversion. My 12-hour days, my expertise in uncovering complex financial deceptions, it was all just a hobby. Mark, bless his heart, often missed the nuance. He saw his mother as particular and a bit old-fashioned. He'd hear her words at face value. She's just trying to make conversation, Danny, he'd say later. And I'd let it go, because I loved him, and I didn't want to be the wedge between him and his family. But I am an observer by nature and by trade. I notice things. I noticed the way she'd bring up Mark's ex-girlfriend, a blonde heiress from a good family, at every opportunity. I noticed the way she'd look at my hands, my unmanicured, practical hands, with a flicker of distaste. I was an anomaly in her pristine world, a variable she couldn't control, a number that didn't add up in her perfect ledger. Then our daughter Lily was born, and the stakes changed completely. Holding her in my arms, I felt a love so fierce it was terrifying. She was perfect. She had Mark's kind eyes and my dark curly hair. She was a beautiful, tiny fusion of our two worlds. For a while, even Patricia seemed to soften. She would visit, bringing extravagant gifts, cooing over the baby in her bassinet. But my observational skills, the ones I used to track illicit transactions and hidden assets, picked up on the details. Patricia never said Lily looked like me. She would say, "Oh, she has the Atwood chin," or "Those are certainly Mark's ears." She was editing my contribution out of my own daughter's existence. When Lily was 18 months old, we got the diagnosis: a rare genetic condition, something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a hypermobility type that affected her connective tissues. It wasn't life-threatening, but it would mean a lifetime of chronic pain, joint dislocations, and a need for constant, specialized physical therapy that our insurance barely covered. It meant we would need resources, significant resources. This is where the Atwood Family Trust became more than an abstract concept. It was a massive fund, managed by a board on which Patricia and Robert held significant sway. Upon Robert's impending retirement, a substantial portion was set to be disbursed to Mark. It wasn't money we wanted for ourselves. It was for Lily. It was her future. It was the difference between a life of constant struggle and a life of managed, supported care. It was everything. And that's when Patricia's campaign escalated from quiet condescension to a cold war. Her comments became more pointed, laced with a new, chilling insinuation. "She's so fragile," she'd say, watching Lily take a tentative step and stumble. "It's strange. The Hatwoods have always been so robust." One afternoon, she was watching Lily play on the floor. My daughter has a slightly darker complexion than Mark, a beautiful olive tone inherited from my Italian grandmother. Patricia stared at her for a long moment and then looked at me. "It's remarkable how genetics can be so unpredictable, isn't it? She doesn't look a thing like Mark, really." She was building a case. She was poisoning the well, not just with me, but with Robert. He was the patriarch, the one whose signature would ultimately release the funds. He was a quiet man, but he revered the family name, the bloodline. Patricia knew his weakness. She was planting a seed of doubt in the one place it could do the most damage. She was suggesting that Lily, my beautiful, vulnerable daughter, was not an Atwood at all. She was implying that I had been unfaithful and that Lily was the product of an affair. It was a monstrous accusation, but she never said it outright. She just laid the breadcrumbs, confident that others would follow them to her desired conclusion. She was building a weapon, piece by piece, aimed at the heart of my family. The inciting incident, the moment her Cold War turned hot, happened on a Tuesday. The Atwoods were on a short cruise to Bermuda, and they had asked me to pick up their mail, a task I loathed but did to keep the peace. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the silent, cold house. The mail was in a neat pile on a silver tray in the foyer. Bills, magazines, and a thin, windowed envelope from a company called Veritas Genetics. My blood ran cold. I knew the name. My firm had used them for forensic genealogy in a complex inheritance fraud case. They were a DNA testing company. The letter was addressed to Mrs. Patricia Atwood. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I held the envelope up to the light. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see the shape of a customer ID number and a set of instructions. It wasn't a marketing letter. It was a kit or a confirmation. I placed it back on the tray, my hand trembling slightly. For a moment, I considered shredding it. I considered throwing it away. But I am a forensic accountant. I don't destroy evidence, I follow it. I drove home in a daze, Patricia's veiled comments echoing in my ears. "She doesn't look a thing like Mark. It's strange. The Atwoods have always been so robust." It all clicked into place with the sickening finality of a deadbolt sliding home. She was going to do it. She was going to get a DNA sample from my child. I thought about the last time she had visited, how she'd been tidying up Lily's room and had picked up her little pink hairbrush. "Just cleaning up, dear," she'd said, with a tight smile. She had taken hairs from my daughter's brush. She was going to run a paternity test to prove Mark wasn't Lily's father, to disinherit her, to invalidate my marriage, and to finally, surgically excise me from the family. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched Lily sleeping in her crib, her small chest rising and falling, and I felt a cold, clear rage settle over me. It wasn't hot or impulsive. It was the kind of focused, methodical anger I felt when I was closing in on a white-collar criminal who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Patricia had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated me. She saw me as the poor girl from Northgate, the unsophisticated wife. She had forgotten what I did for a living. I didn't just balance books, I dismantled lies for a living. And she had just built the most elaborate lie of all. I would not confront her. I would not tell Mark. Not yet. He would want to have a screaming match, an emotional confrontation that Patricia would easily win by playing the victim. Emotion was her battlefield. Mine was facts. Mine was data. I had 2 weeks until they returned from their trip. 2 weeks until she would likely get her results and plan her grand reveal. 2 weeks to turn the weapon she had built against her. The next morning, my 2 weeks of work began. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur was a private investigator, the best in the city. He was discreet, expensive, and frighteningly effective. He was the man you called when you needed information that did not want to be found. I had worked with him once on a case involving a CEO hiding assets in the Cayman Islands. He found them in 72 hours. I met him in a coffee shop far from my neighborhood. He was a small, unassuming man in a rumpled suit, the kind of person you'd never look at twice. "Mrs. Atwood," he said, stirring his black coffee. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I laid it out for him. The mother-in-law, the trust fund, the suspected DNA test, the hairbrush. He listened without a single flicker of expression. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee. "She thinks you're stupid," he said. It wasn't a question. People with old money always make that mistake. They think it makes them smart. He nodded slowly. "So, what do you need from me?" "I need confirmation of the test, but more importantly, I need samples," I said. "I need clean, uncontaminated DNA samples from Patricia Atwood and Robert Atwood. As soon as possible." He raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting escalation." "She wants to play with genetics," I said, my voice low and even. "Let's give her a full family portrait." Arthur smiled for the first time, a thin, reptilian stretching of his lips. "I like your style, Mrs. Atwood. Consider it done. They dock back in 5 days. I'll have what you need before then." My next step was to arrange my own test. I didn't go to Veritas. I went to a top-tier medical genetics lab, one that provided court-admissible results and a full genealogical workup, including mitochondrial and Y chromosome haplogroup analysis. It was exponentially more expensive and infinitely more detailed. This would be my proof object. I paid for the most comprehensive panel they offered and for a 7-day rush processing. The kit arrived the next day. I carefully swabbed the inside of my cheek, then Mark's while he was sleeping, citing a bad cold and not wanting to wake him if he asked. The hardest part was Lily. I had to swab her cheek while she was squirming in her high chair, distracting her with a piece of banana. The 3 vials felt impossibly heavy in my hand. They represented the truth, whatever it was. 4 days later, Arthur called. "I have a delivery for you," was all he said. We met at the same coffee shop. He slid a small padded envelope across the table. Inside were 2 evidence bags, each containing a single hair, follicles attached. One was silver, the other a lighter gray. They were labeled PA and RA. "How?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "People are creatures of habit," he said, shrugging. "She goes to the same salon every Tuesday. He gets a trim at the same barber shop on Wednesdays. It's amazing what people leave behind. I also got a look at her credit card statement, a charge to Veritas Genetics 2 weeks ago. You were right. He also gave me a detailed report on Patricia's known associates and activities. For now, it was just background, but I filed it away. Every piece of data was potentially useful. I sent the 2 new samples to the lab overnight, adding them to my existing case file. Then, the waiting began. It was the longest week of my life. On the outside, I was calm. I went to work. I played with Lily. I talked to Mark on the phone every night, listening to him complain good-naturedly about the cruise ship's terrible Wi-Fi. He was happy and relaxed, entirely unaware of the war being planned in his name. Inside, I was a coiled spring. I spent my nights not sleeping, but digging. My forensic accounting skills were not limited to numbers. They were about pattern recognition, about finding the one loose thread that, when pulled, unravels everything. I turned those skills to the Atwood family. Patricia was obsessed with lineage, with the purity of the Atwood name. Why? Obsessions like that don't come from nowhere. They come from fear. Fear of what? I started with public records. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, census data, property deeds going back 100 years. I built a family tree. Not the glossy, curated one from the book in their library, but a real one, full of hard data. I cross-referenced it with old society pages from the city's newspaper archives. The Atwoods had been prominent for generations, their engagements, weddings, and births all dutifully reported. I focused on Patricia. She was born Patricia Davenport, the daughter of a moderately successful banker. She had married Robert Atwood when she was 22. The society pages called it a brilliant match. I found her high school and college yearbooks online. I scanned the pages, the black and white photos of young faces full of unwritten futures. In her senior year of college, a year before she married Robert, I found something. A photo of her in the drama club. She was the lead in a play. Standing next to her, his arm casually around her shoulder, was a young man with intense eyes and a confident smirk. His name was Julian Croft. The name meant nothing to me. I ran a search. Julian Croft. There were a few hits, but nothing significant. I dug deeper, using the research databases I had access to through my firm. I found a Julian Croft who had attended the same university as Patricia at the same time. His family was from Northgate, my old neighborhood. They weren't prominent. His father was a mechanic. After college, it seemed Julian had moved away. The trail went cold. It was a dead end, but I filed the name away. A piece of data without context. The email from the genetics lab arrived on a Friday morning at 10:17 a.m. The subject line was simple. Your results are ready. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I closed my office door, took a deep breath, and clicked the link. I entered the secure password. A series of PDF documents were available for download. I opened the first one, the summary report. My eyes scanned the page, looking for the first, most important confirmation. Paternity analysis. Lily Atwood and Mark Atwood. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. Lily was Mark's. Of course she was. I never truly doubted it, but seeing it there, in black and white, was an affirmation that settled deep in my bones. Patricia's entire premise was a lie. But I had ordered the full panel. I had tested everyone. I scrolled down. Genealogical analysis, Mark Atwood and Robert Atwood. The lab compared the Y chromosome DNA, which is passed directly from father to son, unchanged. I read the technical language, my mind processing it with the cold clarity of a professional. Haplotypes, STR markers, mismatches. Then, The summary sentence: clinical and devastating. Conclusion: Robert Atwood is excluded as the biological father of Mark Atwood. I read the sentence again and again. The room was silent, but a roar was building in my ears. Mark, my Mark, the man who defined himself in gentle opposition to the Atwood legacy, was not an Atwood by blood at all. This meant that Patricia, the zealous guardian of the Atwood bloodline, the woman who had spent years making me feel inferior for my own humble origins, had a secret that dwarfed any of my perceived shortcomings. She had built her entire identity, her entire reign of quiet terror, on a foundation of monumental hypocrisy. Her obsession with purity wasn't about protecting the family name. It was about hiding her own transgression. It was a desperate, lifelong act of misdirection. My mind raced. Who then? Who was Mark's father? I opened another file from the lab, the detailed genealogical report. It included distant genetic matches, fourth and fifth cousins, people who shared small segments of DNA. I scanned the list of unfamiliar names. Then I saw it, a predicted third cousin match for Mark. The surname was Croft. I felt a jolt, as if I'd touched a live wire. Julian Croft, the boy from the drama club, the boy from Northgate. I went back to my research, but this time I wasn't looking for Julian. I was looking for his family. I found an obituary for his mother from a few years back. It listed her surviving relatives, a sister, an aunt, living in Arizona. Using a paid database, I found the aunt's phone number. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. What was I doing? This was insane. But I had to know. I had to close the loop. An elderly woman's voice answered. "Hello?" "Hello," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "My name is Danielle. I'm a researcher working on a project about city history. I'm trying to find some information about a man named Julian Croft who grew up in Northgate." "Julian," she said, her voice warming with memory. "Oh, he was my sister's boy. A handsome devil, that one. Broke his mother's heart when he left." "Do you know what happened to him?" I asked, holding my breath. "He got his heart broken, is what happened," she said. "He was head over heels for some rich girl from the university, Patty or something. Her family didn't approve of him, of course. He wasn't good enough. They were all set to run away together. He'd even packed his bags. Then, at the last minute, she backed out. Married some rich fellow her parents picked out for her a few months later. Julian was never the same. He joined the army, went to Vietnam. He never came home." My hand was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. Patricia, Patty, she hadn't just had a fling, she had been in love. She had planned to run away, and she had chosen money and status over that love. And Mark, my husband, was the living, breathing secret she had carried ever since. A secret she buried under a lifetime of obsession with the very bloodline she had betrayed. I thanked the woman and hung up. I sat in my office, the city noise outside my window muted and distant. I now had everything. I had the DNA report. I had the story. I had the truth. My proof object wasn't just the lab results. It was the entire, meticulously researched narrative. I printed everything. The full 30-page lab report, the public records, a copy of the yearbook photo of Patricia and Julian, the notes from my call with his aunt. I placed it all into a thick, legal-sized manila envelope, a mirror image of the one Patricia was preparing to use against me. The Atwoods came home on Saturday. On Sunday morning, Patricia called. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. "Danielle, dear, we'd love to have you and Mark and little Lily over for a family dinner tonight. A proper welcome home. Robert is making his famous roast lamb." It was an invitation, but it felt like a summons. "We'd love to," I said, my voice perfectly even. The trap was set. All I had to do was walk into it. The drive to their house felt different that evening. The familiar dread I usually felt was gone, replaced by a strange, cold calm. Mark was beside me, humming along to the radio, happy to be having a family meal. Lily was in the back, babbling to her stuffed giraffe. It was a perfect portrait of a family, and I was on my way to detonate a bomb in the middle of it to save it. The irony was not lost on me. We walked in, and the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. Robert was in the kitchen, fussing over the lamb. Patricia greeted us at the door, kissing Mark, then Lily, her eyes lingering on my daughter with a look of predatory pity. She gave me a cool, air kiss near my cheek. "Danielle, so glad you could come." Dinner was an exercise in excruciating tension. Patricia was the perfect hostess, guiding the conversation, refilling wine glasses, telling amusing anecdotes from their cruise. She spoke about the importance of family, of legacy, of the things that endure. It was a master class in hypocrisy, and I watched her, memorizing every false smile, every calculated gesture. Mark tried to engage, but the air was too thick. Even he could feel it now. Robert was almost entirely silent, eating his food with a grim, mechanical precision. He knew something was coming. He had been living with this woman for 40 years. He knew the signs. Finally, after the plates were cleared and a ridiculously complex dessert had been served, Patricia folded her hands on the table. The moment had arrived. "Well," she said, her voice dropping into a somber, serious register, "there's something we need to discuss, as a family." Mark put his fork down. "Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strange all night." Patricia didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on me. She reached down beside her chair and retrieved a familiar-looking manila envelope. She placed it on the table between us. It made a soft, definitive sound in the quiet room. "I think you need to see this," she said, sliding it across the polished surface toward me. This was the moment, the cold open of her vicious little play. Mark stared at the envelope, then at his mother, his face a storm of confusion and dawning anger. "Mother, what is this? What have you done?" "I've done what was necessary," she said, her voice taking on a tone of righteous martyrdom. "For this family, for the Atwood name." She looked at me, a cruel, sad smile on her lips. "Danielle, my dear, I've been so worried. There are things that a mother notices. For the sake of this family's integrity, for Lily's own sake, I felt it was my duty. I had to know the truth." "Go on, Danielle. Let's clear the air." She wanted me to open it. She wanted to watch my face crumble as I read the results she had fabricated in her own mind. She wanted to see Mark's world shatter. She wanted Robert to see the justification for cutting Lily, the interloper, out of their lives and their fortune. I didn't touch the envelope. I simply looked at her, my expression calm, my breathing even. I let the silence stretch, letting her manufactured drama hang in the air until it became awkward. "It's all right, Patricia," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the table. "I know what it is." Her perfect composure faltered for a fraction of a second. This was not in her script. "It's a paternity test," I continued, looking directly at her. "For Lily, using DNA you took from her hairbrush." Mark gasped. "She what? Mom? You took my daughter's DNA?" His voice was shaking with rage. "How could you?" Patricia recovered quickly, waving a dismissive hand at him. "Mark, please, This is for the best. Can't you see? She's not denying it. She turned her triumphant gaze back to me. Then you understand why this was necessary. Oh, I understand more than you can possibly imagine, I said. I reached into my own bag, which I had placed carefully by my feet. I pulled out my own envelope. It was thicker, heavier, more substantial. I placed it on the table next to hers. The second envelope, my proof object. Patricia's smile froze on her face. Her eyes darted from my envelope to my face. The hunter was suddenly realizing she might be the prey. "You're right, Patricia," I said, my voice still level, still devoid of the emotion she was expecting. "Family integrity is important. So is the truth. Which is why, when I discovered your plan 2 weeks ago, I ran my own, more comprehensive tests. I picked up my envelope and slid it not to her, but to my father-in-law. Robert, I believe this is for you. It contains the certified court-admissible results from a full genetic panel. For me, for Mark, for Lily, for you, and for Patricia." The color drained from Patricia's face. Every drop of it. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Robert stared at the thick envelope as if it were a snake. He looked at his wife, whose mask of serene control was cracking into 1,000 tiny fissures. He looked at me, and in my eyes, he saw no malice, only fact. Slowly, with trembling hands, he reached for the envelope. He tore the seal. He pulled out the thick sheaf of papers. Mark was silent, watching his father, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sense of dread. The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper as Robert turned the pages. I didn't need to narrate. I just watched his face. I saw the first flicker of relief as he read the first page, the one confirming Lily's paternity. He visibly relaxed. Then he kept reading. I watched his brow furrow in confusion as he scanned the pages of haplotypes and genetic markers. And then I saw the exact moment he reached the conclusion. The moment the world shifted under his feet. His face, already pale, went ashen. His breath hitched. He looked up from the page, his eyes filled with a dawning 40-year-old horror. He didn't look at me. He looked at his wife. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a rasp I had never heard before. It was the voice of a man whose entire life had just been revealed as a fiction. "Patricia," he whispered, "what is this?" She just stared at him, speechless. Her weapon had not only misfired, it had exploded in her hand. I decided it was time to provide the context. The report confirms, with 99.999% certainty, that Lily is Mark's daughter, I said calmly, for Mark's benefit. He let out a shuddering breath, his hand finding mine under the table. "It also confirms," I continued, my gaze now fixed on Patricia, "that Mark, while being your son, is not Robert's biological son." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth from the room. Mark stared at me, then at his mother, his face a canvas of utter disbelief and dawning comprehension. The little comments, the strange tensions, his feeling of being an outsider in his own family, it was all being recast in a terrible new light. Robert dropped the papers on the table. "Who?" he asked Patricia, his voice now dangerously quiet. Patricia just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, not tears of remorse, tears of self-pity. She had been caught. I answered for her. I had done the research. I would finish the report. "His name was Julian Croft," I said into the silence. "You knew him in college. His family was from Northgate. You were in love. You were going to run away together, but you didn't. You chose this. You chose the Atwood name. And you buried your secret so deep, you thought no one would ever find it. You spent your life punishing anyone who reminded you of a world outside of this one. You punished me for my background because you were terrified of your own. I slid the final piece of paper across the table, the black and white yearbook photo of a young, smiling Patricia with her arm around a handsome, dark-eyed boy named Julian. That's when she finally broke. It wasn't a scream. It was an implosion. A low, guttural sob of utter defeat. Her perfect world, built on a scaffold of lies and propped up by her cruelty, had collapsed into dust. Mark was looking at his hands, trying to process an impossible truth. His entire identity had been rewritten in the span of 5 minutes. But then he looked up, first at his mother's crumpled form, then at me, sitting there calm and resolute beside him. His loyalty, which had been pulled and tested for years, snapped firmly and finally into place. He squeezed my hand, but the most important reaction came from Robert. He stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He walked around the table and stood behind Mark. He put his hands on his son's shoulders. Mark looked up at him, his eyes full of pain and confusion. "You are my son," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion but clear and firm. "You have always been my son. I raised you. I love you. That has never been a question. A piece of paper changes nothing about that." He then turned his gaze, now cold as a glacier, to Patricia. "But you," he said, his voice dropping, "you have made a mockery of this family, the very family you claim to be protecting. You have lived a lie and you have tried to destroy the best part of what was left of it." He gestured to me, to Mark, to the empty space where Lily's high chair had been. "It's over, Patricia. Everything. It's over." The consequences were not emotional. They were systemic. In the weeks that followed, Robert was true to his word. He initiated divorce proceedings immediately. He convened a meeting with the family lawyers and had Patricia summarily removed as a trustee from the Atwood Fund. He then restructured the trust, signing Mark's entire portion over to a new, separate trust for the benefit of Lily's long-term care, with Mark and me as the sole trustees. Patricia was left with a modest settlement stipulated by her prenuptial agreement, an agreement she had once lorded over me as a reminder of my status. She lost the house, the name, the social standing. She lost the entire world she had traded her heart for, all those years ago. Months have passed. Our life is quiet now. Mark and I are stronger than we have ever been. The truth, as devastating as it was, bonded us in a way nothing else could have. He's in therapy, working through the shock of it all, but he knows who he is. He is a good man, a wonderful father, and my husband. He is the son of Robert Atwood in every way that matters. Lily is thriving. Her physical therapy is expensive, but we can afford it. She is a happy, bright little girl, surrounded by a love that is unconditional and true. Robert is a constant presence in our lives. He dotes on Lily, his only grandchild. In losing the lie of his marriage, he has found the truth of his family. We never speak of Patricia. She is a ghost, a cautionary tale. I see her name in a gossip column once. A brief mention of her living in a small condo on the coast, her social circle vanished. The people who try hardest to expose your secrets are usually the ones with the biggest secrets of their own. She built a weapon to prove my daughter wasn't good enough, and in the end, the only thing it proved was that she herself had never been. She set a fire to burn my house down, and the wind changed, and it burned her own to the ground. If this story reminded you to trust your own strength and your own truth when everyone else doubts you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that message. Thank you for being here with me. Drop a comment to say hello, and please hit that subscribe button for more stories.